俺の財宝か？欲しけりゃくれてやる。探せ！この世のすべてをそこに置いてきた。
Yo guys, and welcome to this third video about the Void Century, which, while trying to understand the meaning of the D and of the will of D, also tries to uncover how this very meaning was erased alongside everything concerning the Void Century itself. But before starting, let me say I publish new videos every week, so make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to always know when I upload something new. Alright, with that said, let's jump straight into it. So at this point of the story, it's clear that D is connected to the Void Century, and if this wasn't clear from the fact often when it is mentioned there are references to that erased past, this connection is evidently confirmed in Marineford by Whitebeard's flashback about his last meeting with Roger and by the following last words of the strongest man in the world. Moreover, the fact that D was one of the very first aspects Oda decided to include in One Piece, since Luffy's name already contained it in both the prototypes of One Piece he published before the beginning of the serialization, the importance of the D is probably strongly connected to the themes particularly emphasized at the beginning of the series, which constitute the core of the manga itself, and with the very nature of the One Piece treasure, as I will discuss in more detail in the next videos of this series. Now, the very first thing we have to consider while trying to understand the meaning of D is that there are multiple bloodlines associated to this letter, not only because it characterizes human families apparently not related to each other, but in particular because even giants possess this mysterious name. Now, a pedant might notice that actually it's not 100% sure that the giant race and the human race are not related to each other. Indeed, in Punk Hazard, Chopper revealed that for centuries scientists, including also Vegapunk, tried the so-called gigantification, a process supposed to transform a human in a giant. And in the first video of this series, we underlined how probably the civilization erased during the Void Century had a technology much more advanced than that of this era of the One Piece world. So it won't be absurd to think they actually achieved the gigantification, which could also constitute the reason why the world government had Vegapunk dedicate himself to that project. However, it's also true we already saw giant-sized people in One Piece. Indeed, both Big Mom and Kaido are practically the size of a giant, suggesting that if gigantification was indeed achieved, the result won't be that different from the two Yonko. But since giants live more than 2 and sometimes 300 years, while instead both Kaido and Big Mom seem to have a lifespan and thus a physiology equal to that of a normal-sized human, I think it's safe to assume giants are and have always been their own race separated from that of normal-sized or gigantified humans. If so, this confirms the name D did not characterize a single family, but instead a group of people belonging to at least 2 different races connected by something different than blood. And following the ideas exposed in the previous videos of this series, that name most likely characterized the alliance between the giants and the Joyboy's faction of the Ancient War. This suits very well with the fact that, according to Rocinante, in certain areas of the world the D is called God's natural enemy, Not only because the Tenryubito, the descendants of the first founders of the world government, considered themselves gods of the world, but mainly because, according to my theory, those founders were led by the priest class of the winged folks descended from the moon, which, according to what we saw in Skypiea and on the hieroglyphs on the moon, always ruled that population with the title of God. The same title of Ener, a member of that same class, who in fact, coincidentally enough, found the natural enemy of his devil fruit, which seemed invincible, in a member of the D clan. And from the perspective of this rivalry between the D and the celestial dragons, it becomes extremely interesting and relevant that the very reason why the Void Century was erased was probably to erase the D itself. Indeed, I've always wondered why the faction who won the war needed to erase everything that happened before, since at that point they certainly were the greatest superpower in the world, capable of controlling anything just with their military strength. But since they still erased a century from history, this means there was something they couldn't hope to destroy or control. And the only things fitting this description are the ancient weapons, evidently connected with the ideals of the losing faction of the war, just like Clover deduces in the O'Hara flashback. And so I think that since the first founders of the world government both didn't know the location of the weapons, and they knew they couldn't control them anyway, fearing that someday someone would have followed the ideals of Joyboy's faction of the war, using Pluton, Poseidon and Uranus for that mysterious purpose without anyone having the possibility to stop them, they decided to prevent this possibility, cleverly erasing those very ideals from history itself. In this way, even if the ancient weapons continue to exist with the potential of fulfilling that goal, not even the members of the D-Clan know what that goal is anymore, and this plan would have been a complete success for the world government if the Gotsuki clan had not managed to preserve everything that was erased by writing it down on stones the enemies of Joyboy's alliance could not destroy. Indeed, even if the D folks wouldn't know anything about their clan's past, during the course of history unavoidably many of them would be led towards the Grand Line, especially those carrying the so-called Will of D that we will discuss later, and a few would also find some of those stones, and this fact, combined with the capability inherited inside the Gotsuki clan to decode their content, eventually a D person would decipher all the message and reach the last destination the poneglyphs point out, Raftel, which, following this reasoning, we shall assume is so mysteriously hidden specifically to preserve a message for the D clan members, explaining the history of the clan itself and what it wanted to achieve, maybe from Joyboy himself, as we will see later when talking about the voice of all things. But then a question arises. Indeed, if for the world government it was so important to erase everything about the Void Century, why didn't they also delete the very existence of the D, which instead survived in the names of many all over the world? Actually, the D is not even the only ghost that survived the destruction. For example, in Alabasta, the royal family passed the duty of protecting the poneglyph. Similarly, the inhabitants of Shandora knew their ancestors fought to protect the poneglyph and won. The carpenters of Water 7 hid the projects of Pluton for centuries. In Fishman Island, the royal family passed from generation to generation information, the knowledge of the promise between Joyboy and Poseidon, and the duty to protect the Noah. And last but definitely not least, in Wano for 800 years the Kotsuki clan inherited the capability to write and read the hieroglyphs of the poneglyphs. All of this information clearly is something passed directly from the Void Century, and to me the only logical explanation for the founders of the world government allowing this knowledge to live is that they couldn't kill it, most likely because of the very mechanism they used to achieve the erasure, a mechanism that in my opinion is divided in two parts. First, there was the destruction of every existing document about what happened during the Void Century, which is something not difficult to imagine possible in a world dominated by devil fruit powers, especially after Oda revealed Mondor's book ability, while the second and more important part consisted in denying everyone all over the world to transmit their knowledge about the events in both written and oral ways. Now, of course, one simple way to do that is erasing people's memory. However, if this was the case, it is difficult to explain how the information we said before survived. For this reason, a way that fits much more everything we said before is instead to forcibly forbid everyone to communicate whatever they know about a certain subject, no matter which way they try to use. That is something, again, difficult to think impossible in a world where devil fruits exist, and in this perspective, a not so unlikely possibility is that this ability is possessed by the supposedly immortal Im-sama himself. The idea that the knowledge was lost because people couldn't transmit it to the next generation not only would create one of those meaningful developments typical of One Piece, where while the ambitions and dreams couldn't be communicated directly, yet the silent but relentless will of the ancestors continued to live through generations, but it would also suit very well with the fact that something actually survived. Indeed, as I said before, in this view someone denied people to share information about specific subjects, but this evidently has the limitation that whatever the user of the ability doesn't consider related to that subject can be normally transmitted. For example, in the very possible case the forbidden subjects where everything about the Ancient Kingdom, the meaning of the D and the goal of the D clan, it is easy to see how all the things we said before, mainly associated to the poneglyphs and to the ancient weapons as weapons and not as means to fulfill a specific goal, could survive. However, before the ability was used, the Kotsuki clan managed to write the poneglyph, which being indestructible also survived the first part of the deletion, the one focused on the documents already existing and documenting what happened during the Void Century. Moreover, actually the One Piece manga may have already given us the confirmation of this theory. Indeed, in Skypiea, in particular in chapter 272, Robin discovered the location of the Poseidon poneglyph by deciphering another one, which begins with the words "Truth in the heart" and "mouth sealed." However, everything that survived would have no importance if it didn't exist, the thing that more than anything else for 800 years continued to seek the deleted ambitions of that lost past, the will of D. Now, even if the fact Whitebeard recognized it in Luffy when the rookie used the Conqueror's Haki suggests that these two things are connected to each other, it's also true that Kureha didn't need Haki to see it in Luffy, which brings to my interpretation of the will of D as something that is indeed a way to transmit the will of the D clan that fought during the Void Century, but not in the form of an inherited, defined ability, and instead as an attitude. As the attitude to rush towards one's own goals and freedom, no matter what, without caring of the consequences and without even caring of death. And because of the way it brings a person to live his or her own life, which I think is also the correct way to live, it gives the person the chance to reach a destination route that can only be reached by those who live this way, those who are evidently also the only ones capable to achieve the goals of the D clan. And indeed, it is that specific way of behaving that both Kureha and Whitebeard noticed about Luffy. And in this sense, it's very interesting and significant that, as Newgate affirms, Teach is not the man Roger was waiting for, implying he doesn't carry this kind of attitude, the will of D. Blackbeard, overwhelmed by the strongest person in the world, shows a very pitiful fear of death. Something that doesn't belong to those who carry the will of D intended as the attitude we described before. Moreover, even if this will is not a true ability, still it clearly inspires and influences people, which has as consequence what Mihawk noticed in Marineford, the capability to easily attract and acquire people's support. Of course, this will of D can be considered a signal that a person is worthy to be Joyboy's heir. However, we may also say it is not enough, because one other requirement is evidently the voice of all things, which differently from the will of D is indeed an ability, although for how similar it can seem to Shiraoshi's and Momonosuke's, the fact it doesn't seem to have a specific target and that it can only listen and not speak make it a completely different beast. And because of this particular nature, if it has a specific role in the plot, it will have to involve listening to something, and my guess is that it is necessary to hear the message sent to the D-Clan members from the Void Century in Raftel. A vocal message somehow stored in a poneglyph or some other object of that age, which only the voice of all things can hear, and that may even have been left by Joyboy himself. Now, with everything we said, the only thing left to discuss about in this video is what D actually stands for, and I think there are two possible ways to approach this aspect. The first is considering it the initial letter of a word that, according to the perspective we are looking the Void Century at in this series, was related to the birth of Joyboy's Alliance and could efficiently express the ideals behind its foundation. If so, the fact it is a letter of our alphabet, and that the only time it is not written that way it is written with katakana, so the Japanese system used for foreign words, suggests this term is not a Japanese one, and in this case there are too many possibilities to actually establish what it is the true meaning of the word. It may be a Greek word just like those used for the devil fruit categories and the names of the ancient weapons, or since giants are inspired by Vikings, it may be a Scandinavian word, and of course it may be a simple English word. Demon, devil, dream, dawn, all of that are possibilities that have equal probabilities, and probably none of them is right, knowing Oda. This uncertainty ends up supporting the rightfulness of the second way of interpreting D, much more fascinating and kinda Oda-like. Indeed, as we saw multiple times in this series of videos, the alliance was between different races, and even among humans, there were different families, and we have to remember the core was composed by winged folks, the descendants of those who came from the moon. So we're talking about a combination of multiple cultures, and in this situation it's very likely the members decided to represent the aliens with something having an universal meaning and referring to the circumstances of its foundation. And for this purpose, rather than using a word, just like it happens in our world, when people from different places decide to support together the same ideal, it is highly likely that Joyboy's alliance was unified under a symbol. A symbol that after their loss, after their history and ideals were erased, may have silently survived through centuries, hidden behind what it seems now a meaningless letter carried by many carefree people with the potential to change the world. I become more and more convinced that D is not actually a D, but instead the stylized version of the symbol which once characterized Joyboy's faction of the Ancient War. And this point of view makes much more sense. First, because if D was a word, it would make no sense that the original D members put only the initial in their names, but if we assume they put the entire word, then we must also assume the rest of the term was erased by the world government. But then it makes no sense that they left the initial. Why they didn't erase the entire term? Moreover, since in any case it is highly likely the aliens had some sort of symbol, it is much more logical to think the members decided to carry the symbol itself in their name and not a word, especially if the symbol had a shape allowing it to be disguised as a letter. But then what this symbol represented? Well, in One Piece there is actually something clearly associated to the D and to the Void Century, which not only can be easily transformed into a D if drawn, but that also exists in both a human-sized and a giant-sized version. And so, for everything we said, I think that it's much more logical to see the D not as a D, but instead as a straw hat. This also suits with the fact the hat is another thing, together with the D, Oda included in both One Piece prototypes, and would perfectly explain everything we saw about the hat up until now, especially what we saw during the reverie, with Im-sama holding the posters of two D people while looking at a giant version of Luffy's straw hat, and the fact the hat itself was originally related to the alliance between Joyboy and the Giants could have already been hinted by Oda in the way Portegas the Ace, son of the only person who in centuries could reach Raftel, acquired the friendship of Little Odds Jr., member of the Ancient Giant race, by making and giving to him a bamboo hat. By the way, the fact that according to the Vivercat data book these ancient giants have demon-like features supports the idea they fought those who consider themselves the gods of the world. And since the only two members of this race we know up until now are called Odds in the original Japanese, this could open new possibilities of speculation about the legendary city once mentioned by Bellamy in Mocktown having the same name of the one inhabited by the wonderful Wizard of Oz in the homonymous tale, Emerald City. And while you let your thoughts free to roam among the new possibilities this opens, remember that if you want, you can help this channel grow by sharing this video with whoever you want, wherever you want. Thank you very much for watching, don't forget to leave a like and make sure to subscribe. See you next time. Jane.